My name is Colt Holloway. I am 42 years old. I am the technical director of a small engineering firm just outside Columbus, Ohio. I drive a sensible car. I keep my desk clean. I arrive 5 minutes early to everything. I am the kind of man people describe as solid, dependable, steady. The man you call when something needs to be built right and built to last. For 12 years, I believed my marriage was exactly that, built right, and built to last. I was wrong. And the night I discovered exactly how wrong I was, is the night this story begins. Our anniversary fell on a Thursday that year, and I had made a reservation at Meridian, the kind of place with low lighting, linen tablecloths pressed so smooth they looked like white silk, and a sommelier who could identify a vintage by the color alone. I had called ahead. I asked them to place a small bouquet of dahlias on the table when we arrived. Carla's favorite flower. I had remembered that since our second date. I wore the charcoal jacket she had once told me made me look like a man who had his life together. She walked out of our bedroom in a burgundy dress I had never seen before, deep red like a winter wine, and for one quiet moment, I forgot the 12 years of routine between us and just looked at her. She was beautiful. She still was. That was the cruelest part of everything that came after. We sat down. The candles were low. The dahlias were exactly right. I ordered a bottle of Malbec, and she held my hand across the table and told me that 12 years felt like nothing, like the span of a single good conversation. I smiled and meant it. I was still that foolish. Midway through the main course, I excused myself. Our server had mentioned the dessert menu featured a chocolate torte that Carla had been eyeing since we sat down, that little smile she gets when she sees something she wants but won't let herself ask for. I wanted to settle the bill early. Pay quietly. Let us leave on our own terms, no card fumbling, no awkward waiting. Just the two of us, the dessert, and the rest of the evening still open ahead of us. Thoughtful. That was me. Always trying. I settled up at the host stand near the back of the restaurant and started walking toward our table. The corridor was narrow, host stand on one side, the warm glow of the dining room on the other. And that's when I heard it. The booth just around the corner from ours. A laugh. Carla's laugh. But not the version I knew. Not the polished, careful laugh she used at dinner parties when someone said something mildly funny and she was being gracious. Not the tired, half-hearted laugh she gave me when I tried to be funny after a long week and she was too exhausted to pretend harder. This laugh was loose. Unguarded. Alive in a way I had not heard in years. The laugh of a woman who felt completely, utterly safe. I stopped walking. A man's voice, low, comfortable, unhurried, said something I couldn't fully catch. The tone of it was worse than the words. It had the ease of shared history. The shorthand of people who had been learning each other for a long time. Then Carla replied. And her words fell into me like a stone dropped into still water. Colton. He'll just disappear quietly. That's what he does. He doesn't make scenes. More laughter. Soft and certain. Then, this is the last anniversary dinner I'm going to sit through. I stood in that narrow corridor with one hand resting lightly against the wall. A server passed me carrying a tray of desserts. I stepped aside automatically, the instinct of a man trying not to be in anyone's way, as if my entire marriage had not just rearranged itself in the space of 15 seconds. I didn't recognize the man's voice. But I knew it wasn't a stranger. The familiarity in it was unmistakable, the way two people talk when they have built something private between them. That kind of ease takes time. Months, at minimum. Possibly much longer. I walked back to the table. I sat down. I picked up my wine glass. Everything okay? Carla asked, tilting her head with that small, careful smile. Perfect, I said, keeping my voice even. They said the torte is exceptional tonight. She lit up and reached for the dessert menu. I watched her fingers trace the laminated card, watched the familiar way she bit her lower lip slightly when something caught her interest, and I tried to reconcile the woman sitting in front of me with the voice I had just heard around the corner. They fit together with terrible precision. I did not confront her. I did not ask. I did not let a single thing cross my face, not the confusion, not the grief, not the particular cold clarity that was beginning to settle in behind my ribs like something that had been waiting there a long time. 12 years of being the calm one. The reasonable one. The one who never made scenes. As it turns out, that training had a use after all. She had told that man I would disappear quietly. She was right that I would disappear. She just had the version of me completely wrong. We finished dessert. The torte was, in fact, exceptional. Carla talked about maybe taking a long weekend somewhere before the weather turned, Cincinnati, maybe, or somewhere with leaves. She said it with the easy warmth of a woman who believed she was managing the situation with grace. I nodded and said that sounded nice. I drove us home. I watched her take off her earrings in the bathroom mirror, humming something quietly to herself, and go to bed without a second look in my direction. I sat in the kitchen until 2 in the morning with a glass of water I never drank, running that voice through my head over and over. He'll just disappear quietly. By the time I finally went to bed, I had made exactly one decision. I was not going to disappear quietly. I was going to disappear completely, on my own terms, in my own time, and in a way Carla would spend years trying to understand. She had no idea what she had just started. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay on my side of the bed and listened to Carla breathe, slow and peaceful, the breathing of a woman with no unfinished business, and I ran the math on 12 years of my life the way a man audits a company he suddenly suspects of fraud. Every quiet dinner that ended with her lost in her phone. Every business trip I never questioned. Every time she came home just slightly off, a little too relaxed, a little too vague about her day, and I had filed it away under marriage going through a phase. Turns out I had been filing things in the wrong drawer for a long, long time. By 5 in the morning I was in the kitchen, coffee in hand, watching the neighbor's dog bark at something in the tree line while the sky shifted from black to gray. And I made myself a promise. No explosions. No accusations. No begging. Whatever I did next, I was going to do it right. The first call I made was to Curtis Malone. Curtis and I had been friends since our mid-20s, back when we were both the youngest people in every room we walked into and had to work twice as hard to be taken seriously. He ran a cybersecurity consulting firm now, the kind of work that required an intimate understanding of exactly how much of the world operated on unprotected data and unexamined assumptions. We met at a diner halfway between our offices. Good coffee. Booths far enough apart that nobody could hear business being discussed. I laid it out plainly. What I'd heard at the restaurant. The laugh. The words. The voice I didn't recognize but knew wasn't a stranger. I told him I needed to know who the man was. I needed it documented. And I needed it done in a way I could defend in any room I'd ever have to stand in. Curtis wrapped both hands around his mug and didn't flinch once. How far do you want to go with this? Far enough to know the truth, I said. Not so far that I'm doing something I can't defend later. He nodded slowly. Give me a couple of days. 2 days later, Curtis had set up discreet monitoring software and showed me how to access GPS data from Carla's phone through a family location app she had installed 2 years ago and stopped checking months back. He also swept our home network. What he found made my stomach drop like a stone. A secondary messaging application, installed on her phone, synced to an account I had never seen, under a name I did not recognize. I didn't confront her. I watched. What came back over the following week was worse than I had imagined, and exactly what I had feared. Late-night messages to a contact saved only as S. Location pings at a downtown hotel on 2 separate Tuesday afternoons. A forwarded email confirmation for a weekend reservation at a lodge outside the city, 2 guests, billed to a card I had never seen. Then Curtis found the name attached to the other account. Stuart Ashby. I sat with that name for a long time. Stuart Ashby wasn't just anybody in Columbus. He was the kind of man whose name got put on buildings. He had developed 2 shopping centers on the east side of the city. He had bankrolled the construction of a charter school in Westerville that had been written up in the local paper 3 times. He showed up at charity galas. He gave speeches at Chamber of Commerce lunches. He was exactly the kind of man who could make a woman feel like she was trading up. He was also 51 years old, recently divorced, and, as I now understood, had apparently been in my wife's life long enough to know exactly how she expected me to respond to all of this. Quietly disappear. She had told him that like it was a settled fact. Like it was the most predictable thing in the world. I pulled up everything I could find on Ashby. Public records. Business filings. Property holdings. Curtis went deeper. What they found in those filings wasn't scandalous on the surface, but there were gaps. LLC structures that didn't quite add up. A contractor dispute settled quietly and quickly. A zoning variance that had moved through the city approval process in 11 days. 11 days. The city average for comparable applications was 4 to 6 months. That's not luck, Curtis told me over coffee, sliding a folder across the table. That's access. Can we document it? Already am. Public records cross-referenced with campaign donation filings. He tapped the folder. It's not a smoking gun yet. But it's the kind of thing that gets interesting when it lands on the right desk. I saved everything to an encrypted folder on a drive I kept locked in my office. In my experience, leverage has a way of revealing its purpose exactly when the moment arrives. That same week, I made an appointment with Irene Parrish. She was a divorce attorney with a reputation built not on emotion, but on architecture, the kind of lawyer who built cases the way engineers build load-bearing structures. Methodical. Tested. Impossible to collapse from the outside. I walked into her office on a Wednesday afternoon and placed my evidence folder on her desk without preamble. She reviewed it for 20 minutes while I sat across from her and said nothing. Finally, she looked up. You've been thorough. I'm an engineer, I replied. I don't present findings until I have data. A faint smile crossed her face, the smile of a professional who had just recognized her own kind. Smart. Don't move any joint assets yet. Not until I tell you. And don't tip her off. The longer she believes everything is normal, the better your position when this goes to court. I drove home that evening and made dinner. Carla came in around 7, kicked off her shoes by the door, and asked what smelled good. I told her pasta. She sat at the kitchen island and talked about a difficult client meeting while I stirred sauce and listened and responded in all the right places. She had no idea that the man standing at her stove had spent the last week quietly constructing the case that would dismantle every plan she had made without him. She thought she was buying time. She was actually running out of it. Curtis's next call, 3 days later, hit harder than anything that had come before. Colton, he said. I need you to sit down before I tell you this. I was already sitting at my kitchen table. Just say it. The earliest message I can recover in that secondary account dates back 4 years and 7 months ago. A pause. But the account itself was created 6 years ago. 6 years. We had been married 12. That meant this hadn't started as a midlife drift. It hadn't been a moment of weakness that grew into something she couldn't control. It had started when William was 11 years old. When Carla and I had just finished paying off the second car. When I thought we were finally, hitting our stride as a family. I set the phone down on the table and stared at the wall for a long time. I had always known, somewhere in the quietest part of my mind, that Carla hadn't married me for the reasons I had married her. She had never been cruel. Never obviously calculating. But there were moments over the years, a flicker of assessment in her expression, a pause before affection, that I had always talked myself out of seeing clearly. I stopped talking myself out of things. 3 days after that, Curtis called again. He had traced the financial threads further back. Transfers. Small at first, then growing. From a joint savings account we had opened when William started high school, supposedly for his college fund, nearly $40,000 had moved, in modest increments over 18 months, to an account I had never seen. An account in Carla's name alone, opened at a credit union across town. $40,000. My money. Built from years of early mornings and late nights at the firm. Quietly redirected toward whatever future she was building without me. Irene didn't miss a beat when I called her. "That changes things significantly," she said, and I could hear the quiet satisfaction of a professional who had just been handed a stronger hand. Financial misrepresentation of that scale gives us real leverage. Don't touch that account. Don't let on that you know it exists. Understood? And Colton, start building a parallel financial picture. Quietly. Nothing that requires her signature. That afternoon, I opened a private checking account at a bank I had never used before, on a side of Columbus I rarely visited. I transferred enough liquid assets to give myself runway without triggering anything obvious. Then I sat in that bank parking lot for 10 minutes, watching strangers walk past the ATM. Thinking about the man I was becoming. Methodical. Contained. Dangerous in a way I had never needed to be before. I was okay with it. What I also found, buried in a note attached to a calendar entry on the family tablet Carla had forgotten to unlink, was a fragment of a message she had copy-pasted. W knows. Don't worry. He won't say anything. That's just W. William. My stepson. 17 years old. A kid I had coached through 2 years of junior varsity baseball. Helped with college application essays. Driven to school on mornings he missed the bus. A kid who knew what his mother was doing. And had decided, apparently, that my feelings about it weren't worth the conversation. I closed the tablet and set it down carefully, the way you set something down when your hands want to do something else entirely. I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet. But I was going to have it. On my terms. The conversation with William happened on a Wednesday evening in October. Carla was at her sister's, confirmed on GPS, genuinely this time. William was at the kitchen table with his earbuds in, working through something for school. I made 2 mugs of coffee, set one in front of him, and pulled out the chair across. He looked up. And something crossed his face, not surprise. More like the recognition of something he had been quietly waiting for. I gently pulled one earbud out. I need to talk to you. He didn't pretend not to know what it was about. That told me everything. He set his pencil down and sat back. Arms loose across his chest. Looking at the table. How long? I asked quietly. A long pause. About a year. Maybe a little more. Did she ask you to keep it from me? He looked up then. The conflict on his face was real, the complicated, exhausted look of a kid who had been handed an impossible situation by the person he was supposed to trust most. She said it was complicated. That she'd handle it. She didn't handle it, William. I know. His voice was low. Almost ashamed. I kept my tone steady, because the anger I felt was not at him. And I was not going to let it land on him. I'm not blaming you. I understand what position she put you in. But what's happening in this house is not your fault. And it was never your responsibility to manage. I let that sit for a moment. It never was. He was quiet for a long time. Then, What are you going to do? Take care of it, I said. The right way. He nodded. Before I stood up, he said, still not looking at me. For what it's worth. I always thought you were a good stepfather. I let that sit where he left it. Then I stood up, squeezed his shoulder once, and went back to my office. Music builds very slowly, something inevitable and quiet, like a tide coming in. November came. And Carla started paying attention to me. Not the real kind, I understood that now with a clarity I hadn't had a year ago. But the performed kind. The strategic kind. The kind a woman deploys when she senses something has shifted in the atmosphere of her home but can't identify the source. She brought home dinner twice without being asked. She mentioned a weekend trip to Cincinnati in the casual voice of someone proposing something spontaneous. She asked me one evening, over her book, whether I had been feeling distant lately. I looked up from the report I was reviewing. Just work stress, I told her. The Dent project's been eating my calendar. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her book. But she kept watching me after that. Small glances over meals. An extra attentiveness that had the quality of someone monitoring an experiment they weren't sure was going the way they designed it. She could sense something had shifted. She just couldn't locate it. Good. What she didn't know was that I had already done the most important thing. I had found a furnished apartment across town, a clean 2-bedroom in a neighborhood I had always liked, in a building where nobody I knew lived within 4 blocks. I had signed a 6-month lease under my own name and paid the deposit in cash from the new account. The lease started December 1st. My exit was ready. I just needed the right moment to walk through it. December arrived the way endings arrive, not with fanfare, but with inevitability. I had been moving pieces off the board for weeks. The apartment on Fairfield Avenue was ready since the first of the month, furnished gradually, one careful trip at a time, on mornings when Carla was at the gym. Books I had been missing for years, quietly relocated. The good coffee maker she had claimed as hers when we reorganized the kitchen, I had bought it. It was mine. I brought it home. My grandfather's tackle box, which had sat in the garage since we moved in, finally found a new shelf. The things that were mine and only mine made their way, slowly and without ceremony, to the place I was already beginning to think of as home. Irene and I met on a Tuesday morning. She walked me through the final structure of the filing with the calm precision of a surgeon who has performed this particular operation 100 times and still takes it seriously every single time. The divorce papers were drafted, signed on my end, and ready to serve. She reviewed the full evidence package, the GPS logs, the financial transfer trail, the hotel receipts, the screenshot archive from the messaging app, and characterized it, in her careful, professional way, as one of the cleaner cases she'd handled in terms of documentation. She's going to contest the financial claims, Irene told me, sliding the folder back across the desk. Let her. Contesting them requires explaining them. And she can't explain them without confirming the affair. She'll be arguing against herself. What about the duplex? Irene allowed herself one small, measured smile, the rarest currency in her office. Offer it at the first mediation session. Frame it as a good faith gesture. She'll take it within 20 minutes. She paused. And the firm's retained equity stake, properly structured as a premarital business asset with retained interest, she gets nothing there unless she wants 2 years of litigation. She won't win. Another pause. Don't let her attorney know you're aware of the college fund transfers until we're in the room. That's our second card. I nodded. Give up the visible piece. Protect the real asset. The night before I filed, Carla made dinner. Lamb chops. Roasted vegetables. A bottle of red she had been saving for something. She had set the table properly, candles, the good plates, which she hadn't done on an ordinary weeknight in years. She was dressed nicely. She had done something with her hair. She reached across the table midway through the meal and touched my hand and said she thought we had both been too caught up in routines. That she wanted things to feel more connected. More intentional. She used the word intentional 3 times. I kept my expression warm and open. I said I thought she was right. I said the new year felt like a good opportunity to reassess. She went to bed that night looking satisfied with herself. I sat in the kitchen afterward and sent Irene a one-word text. Thursday. Thursday morning, I was up at 5:30. I showered. I dressed. I loaded the last 2 boxes from my home office into my car while it was still dark, the house quiet around me, Carla asleep upstairs, the world not yet awake. I left her coffee maker on the counter. She had always considered it hers. She could keep it. I drove to the office. Handled 2 hours of work. And at 10 a.m., I received confirmation from Irene's paralegal. Carla had been served at home at 9:47. Her signature on the receipt was described as shaky. I sat with that for exactly 1 moment. Then I went back to work. Curtis called at noon. The dispatch piece is running Sunday, he said. Front page of the business section. They've got the full LLC chain, the zoning payment, the intermediary connection. A pause. She called Ashby's office for comment yesterday. His PR person spent 45 minutes trying to talk her out of running it. She's running it anyway? She's running it anyway. I thanked him and ended the call. The messages from Carla began at 11:15. What is this? Call me right now. 20 minutes later, Colton, I need to talk to you. Please. Then a longer one, a full paragraph about shock and not understanding and wanting me to come home so we could talk in person. I replied to all 3 with one message. Everything you need to know is in the filing. Irene Parrish's contact information is on the cover page. She called twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. What I hadn't fully anticipated, though I had prepared for it, was Carla arriving at my office. She walked in at 2:15. My assistant's voice on the intercom was carefully neutral in the way it gets when she's reading a situation and choosing not to editorialize. I told her to send Carla in. She walked through the door looking like a woman who had spent the past 4 hours in freefall, trying to find something solid to grab onto. Her composure was mostly intact. Carla was never someone who came apart visibly. But the edges were fraying in ways I could see clearly now, with the fresh eyes I had spent 3 months learning to use. She closed the door behind her and stood in the middle of the room. How long have you known? Sit down, Carla. She stayed standing. How long? Since the anniversary dinner, I said evenly. The booth around the corner from ours. You told him I'd disappear quietly. I leaned back in my chair. You were partially right. Something moved across her face, not guilt, exactly. More like the expression of someone who has just realized the board doesn't look the way they thought it did. It isn't what you think, she started. I held up one hand. I have GPS data, financial records, hotel receipts, and a documented message archive going back 14 months. I've had all of it for weeks. I kept my voice even, almost gentle. So I'd encourage you to think carefully about what you're about to say next. Because I have the receipts for most of it. The composure slipped then, not dramatically, not in the way Carla would have hated, but in the controlled, precise way of someone whose plan has failed in a direction they cannot immediately route around. She sat down. The duplex, she said after a moment. I want the duplex. I know you do. My attorney will discuss it at mediation. A pause. And regarding the savings, your attorney will need to explain certain transfers before we discuss the savings. I watched that land. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Specifically, approximately $40,000 moved from our joint account to an account at Westside Credit Union over an 18-month period. My attorney has the full trail. The silence in my office was total. Colton. We're done here, I said. Not unkindly. This is a legal matter now. Everything goes through Irene. I stood up. I'll walk you out. She stood slowly. And for one moment, just one, she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her in years. Something unguarded. Almost searching. Like she was trying to find the version of me she thought she knew. The one who would have crumbled. The one who would have begged, or raged, or made the kind of scene she could redirect and manage. That version had been gone for 3 months. She just hadn't noticed his absence until now. I held the door open. She walked through it without another word. I watched her cross the parking lot from my window. She sat in her car for a long time before she drove away. Sunday morning, the Columbus Dispatch ran the story. Stuart Ashby's name appeared in the headline. The piece detailed the LLC structure, the zoning payment chain, the intermediary connection. Ashby's spokesperson issued a careful, calibrated denial that confirmed through its very precision exactly how much substance the allegations had. By Monday, 2 city council members had issued statements calling for a formal review of the approval process. By Wednesday, Ashby had retained a criminal defense attorney. Carla stopped contacting me directly after that. Mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning in a neutral office downtown. A conference room with a round table and a moderator named Gerald Frost, who had the look of a man who had heard every version of every story and found none of them surprising anymore. Carla arrived with her attorney, a man named Philip Rhodes, who came in projecting the careful confidence of someone who had reviewed the file and wasn't entirely happy with what he'd found. She was dressed impeccably. Composed. She didn't look at me directly when she sat down. Rhodes led with the house. Irene let him talk for 4 minutes. Then she placed the financial transfer documentation on the table. The full $40,000 trail, traced and confirmed, presented without commentary, just slid across the table and left there. Rhodes glanced at his client. Something behind Carla's eyes recalibrated. "We're prepared to address those transfers," Rhodes said carefully. "I'm sure you are," Irene replied pleasantly. "We can address them in detail. Or we can move to a framework that accounts for them in the division structure. Your client's choice." The silence lasted 8 seconds. Carla leaned toward Rhodes and said something too quiet to hear. He nodded once. "We'd like to discuss the Clintonville property." "Right on schedule." What followed was 40 minutes of negotiation that went almost exactly as Irene had mapped it. Carla's side pushed for the duplex. Irene offered it after measured resistance, framing it as a significant concession. Rhodes accepted within the time frame Irene had predicted. The joint savings account was split with an adjustment reflecting the undocumented transfers. The house went to a structured equity split. The firm's retained equity stake was never mentioned. Rhodes hadn't found it. When Gerald Frost summarized the terms and asked both parties to confirm, I looked across the table at Carla for the first time that morning. She was looking back at me. Her expression was something I couldn't fully name, not quite bitterness, not quite regret, something more complicated than either. Like someone standing at a distance from a fire they lit themselves, realizing it burned differently than they had imagined. "Confirmed," I said. Outside, Irene shook my hand on the sidewalk. "Clean," she said simply. That was enough. I drove to the Fairfield apartment, changed out of my suit, and spent the afternoon moving the last few items in from a storage unit I'd rented in October. By evening, the apartment felt like mine. Not staged, not temporary, actually lived in. I made a proper dinner for the first time in weeks, something with actual effort behind it, and ate at my own table in my own space with the particular satisfaction of a man who has fought a long, quiet battle and come out the other side with his integrity intact. Curtis called while I was washing up. Ashby resigned from the charter school board this afternoon. issued a statement about wanting to address the allegations without distraction to the institution. How'd the statement land? About as well as you'd expect. The business journal's already running a follow-up piece. A pause. He's not done. But he's bleeding. I thanked Curtis, hung up, and stood at the kitchen window watching the street below. Stuart Ashby had spent years building a civic image that gave him cover for arrangements that benefited no one but himself. That image was coming apart now, thread by thread, because someone had put the right information in the right hands. I hadn't destroyed him. I had simply removed the protection. What he did with what remained was his problem. For months after mediation, I was on the roof deck of the Fairfield building on a warm Saturday in May, coffee in hand, watching the Columbus skyline do nothing in particular. William had texted that morning. Accepted to the engineering program at Ohio State. I texted back, that's earned. I'm proud of you. After a pause, his reply came, thanks for everything, Colton. Seriously. I held on to that for a while. The divorce had been finalized in late February. The duplex was Carla's. The equity split on the house had been executed cleanly. My firm's retained stake, the asset Rhodes had never found to ask about, was fully intact and had appreciated another 8% since January. Stuart Ashby's situation had continued to deteriorate at a pace that required no input from me. The Dispatch investigation had prompted a formal city council inquiry. 2 of his commercial tenants had publicly renegotiated lease terms citing uncertainty about the property's ownership structure. By March, there were reports of a grand jury seated to examine the zoning approval process. Carla had been quiet since mediation. She had moved into the duplex. Whether her arrangement with Ashby had survived the public unraveling of his reputation was not something I spent time thinking about. That was their math to do. Brooke and I had started seeing each other properly in March. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just 2 people who liked each other's company and kept finding reasons to extend it. She was straightforward in a way I hadn't realized I had been starving for. She said what she meant. She didn't perform. On our 3rd proper date, she told me bluntly that she had no patience for games and no interest in anything that wasn't real. I looked at her across the table and thought, finally. One evening in April, I was driving back from a site visit when I passed Meridian, the restaurant where Carla and I had our last anniversary dinner. I didn't slow down. I didn't feel the pull to stop, or to reconstruct the memory, or to measure the distance between who I had been that night and who I was now. I just drove past it and turned up the radio. That, I realized, was what actual healing felt like. Not a ceremony. Not a resolution speech. Just a Tuesday evening where a place that used to mean something now meant nothing at all, and the absence of meaning felt like freedom rather than loss. Carla had told Stuart Ashby that I would disappear quietly. She said it with the casual certainty of someone who thought they knew exactly what kind of man they had married. She was right that I disappeared. She was wrong about every other detail. I didn't disappear into bitterness or self-destruction or a long, ugly decline. I disappeared from a life that had been built on a foundation I hadn't known was hollow. And I reappeared somewhere else entirely. A better apartment. A cleaner financial position. A real connection with a woman who had never once looked at me like I was something to be managed. The version of me who sat at that anniversary table and drove home in silence, already building a plan. That man knew something the old version of me hadn't. He knew that quiet doesn't mean weak. That patience isn't the same as passivity. That the most devastating thing you can do to someone who underestimates you is simply to prove them wrong. I proved her wrong. And on that May morning on the roof deck, with William's text still on my screen and Brooke's name in my call log from the night before, I was done looking back. If you stayed with this story from beginning to end, thank you. Not for the numbers. Not for the algorithm. But because this kind of story deserves to be witnessed. It deserves to be felt. And the fact that you're still here tells me something important about you. You're someone who believes that integrity matters even when nobody is watching. That doing things right is worth more than doing them loudly. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something, or someone, or a version of yourself you forgot you were capable of being, leave it in the comments. Your story matters. This community is built on people who've been underestimated and refuse to disappear on someone else's terms. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell. Because stories like this, about quiet strength, patient dignity, and the kind of love you build with someone who sees you clearly, these are the stories we tell here. Every single week. Light bulb the life lesson. Calm, direct, final. Here is what Colt Holloway's story teaches us, all of us. The people who underestimate you are not your enemies. They are simply uninformed. And the most powerful response to being underestimated is not anger. It is not revenge. It is not a scene that gives them something to point to and say, "See? I knew he'd fall apart." The most powerful response is evidence. Quiet, methodical, documented, irrefutable evidence of exactly who you are. There is a version of strength the world rarely talks about, the kind that doesn't need an audience. The kind that works in the early mornings, in the encrypted folders, in the measured conversations, in the patient choices made one at a time by someone who knows exactly where they are going. That is the strength Colt Holloway chose. And it cost him nothing but time. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Patient doesn't mean passive. And the most powerful thing you can do with your pain is build something beautiful out of it. That is the lesson. That has always been the lesson. She thought she knew what kind of man she'd married. She was right about the quiet. She was wrong about everything else.